John's Grocery sits at the corner of Marketplace Street in North Gilbert in Iowa City, Iowa. This red brick building, with its green awnings, has been open since 1948, serving people food, drinks, and meaningful conversations for over 70 years. From riots to celebrations, this building has witnessed essential points of Iowa City history. And if buildings could talk, John's would never run out of stories to tell.
It's kind of, we sell beer, we sell booze, we sell wine, but what we really do is we tell stories.
This is when another essential fact about John's comes into play. John's Grocery has been owned by a singular family in its entire operation, the Alberhaskys. The current owner, Doug Alberhasky, is the third generation in his family to run the store. He has spent his life collecting historical records to piece together a narrative and timeline about Iowa City history. Doug also works with the Iowa City Beer Caves, with the most well-known entrance located under Brewery Square.
Yeah, so my name's Doug Alberhasky. I'm the third generation owner of John's Grocery. We've been around as a grocery store for 175 years. This is one of the first dry goods businesses in Iowa City. It's been in my family now for 75 years. Most of the family has worked here ever since. My grandparents had 7 kids, and all 7 kids grew up in the business. My dad and one of my uncles and one of my aunts made it a career, and I've been here since I was 6 years old. And underneath of the Union Brewing Company, there is still intact caves that had the pleasure of leading many different tours down into and letting people see and touch the history that is beneath our feet that so many people just have no idea is there.
So there are these 3 different chambers that sort of converge at one location around where the ladder is. 2 off of one direction and 1 off another direction.
Adam Skibbe is a Geographic Information Systems Administrator at the University of Iowa who is involved with various LiDAR and other data collection projects surrounding beer caves. LiDAR is a light detecting and ranging technology used to map dark caverns like this one.
It's interesting. It's dark and it's sort of damp. It stays consistently around 63 degrees-ish because it's a sub-basement sort of thing. But it feels like you're out of time a little bit. They're not perfectly maintained over the years, but it's really just kind of surreal. You're in this place that they're caves is how we refer to them, but they're man-built caves, right? So if you think of like an arch over like a train, like an old train station type entry, like in Harry Potter or something like that, made of brick, that's kind of what it feels like.
While Iowa City is known to host the University of Iowa, once a top party school, alcohol runs much deeper in the city's veins, dating back all the way to when the city was actually first established.
Early on, 1850s, when settlement really got going in Iowa City, back at that time, there wasn't a germ theory. So people didn't understand how illness, bacterial illness particularly, was spread. And with the residents being immigrants from Europe, they were familiar with waterborne diseases, not germ theory, but the way they dealt with it in Europe for hundreds of years was to essentially brew a very low percentage alcohol beer that everybody could drink to replenish fluids and not get sick from and not get drunk from.
Mark Anderson currently serves as the head archaeologist at the Sanford Museum in Cherokee, Iowa. Before his current position, he was also involved with the mapping and studying of the beer caves through the State Archaeological Office. He offers both an archaeological and historical perspective into the hows and whys of the beer caves.
And so people brought that technology and that application to their lives to America. And when people arrived in Iowa City, of course, that was the way to make sure that water could be purified so people had a safe source of fluid recovery. Even little kids as young as 12 years old drank beer.
However important the brewing industry was in Iowa City, the mash of cultures and beliefs resulted in tension and a pressure to reduce alcohol presence in daily life.
So you had these different immigrant groups, and so you had the different religious groups kind of battling against each other. But more than anything, it was the wets versus the dries. And at that point in time, about 1/7 of the town's population was engaged in one way, shape, or form with the brewing industry.
As I noted before, brewing beer was a way to provide people with a safe drinking source. It was an early industry. It was an important industry because it required grains coming from the farming community. It required water, so you had to get wells and plumbing. It required coopers who made barrels, and that means wood and metal and a skilled trade. They were making so much beer that they could supply the consumers in Iowa City, but then also supply a wider consumer base. And so this was an important early economic venture for Iowa City. It provided jobs and income into Iowa City, increasing its recognition as a center for trade and commerce.
But you had a lot of people that were very much against alcohol based on the effects that it could have on the family unit, especially. And it led to basically 4 different prohibitions coming into the state of Iowa. The second of the 4 culminated in the beer riots in Iowa City in 1884. It was done on a county-by-county basis, and all of the eastern counties on the Mississippi voted against it because they knew that if prohibition came to their town, everybody would just leave. But in Johns County, it passed by the slimmest of margins. So on July 4th, 1884, prohibition came to Iowa City. And it was a prohibition to sell, not to make. But beer was so hyper-local back then that you only drank what was right in town. Conrad Graff had just purchased the brewery from his wife's father's estate. And so he had just put his entire life savings into buying this brewery, and then is told, oh yeah, by the way, you can't sell beer anymore. And they really couldn't believe that this would ever come to pass. It did, and there may have been some voter irregularity happening even back then, believe it or not. So on July 4th, prohibition came to Iowa City. 2 brothers, the Swafford brothers, who were in the Sons of Temperance movement, they decided that they were going to turn state's evidence against the 3 brewers for selling after the date. So in the middle of August, they decided they were going to give away free beer at one of the bars downtown. The constable said, nope, can't do that, and locked the doors. Well, the gathered crowd, when promised free beer, was going to get free beer. So they knocked down the doors, drank every drop of beer in the place, and then led by Graff, Englert, and Dostal, they went out to Judge Schnell's house, where they proceeded to almost beat to death the 2 brothers, and they actually tarred and feathered the prosecutor. And you'd think that you'd get in trouble for doing something like that, but J.J. Englert was actually a member of the Iowa City City Council and eventually elected to be sheriff. And because of his stature and because of the brewer's stature, they got off with a fine, which the 3 brewers gleefully paid.
And so, brewers were able to continue brewing, at least until 1916, when the next prohibition rolled around. While the brewers had won the battle during the beer riots, they hadn't won the war. Because of this, Iowa had been through prohibition 3 years before the 18th Amendment affected the nation.
The first couple times we went down, it was just a small group, maybe 4 or 5 of us. And the only way to get into the caves was by a ladder. And the ladder was probably a good 20 feet. And it sat on a pile of dirt, literally, that was probably 3+ feet high. And the ladder was old, so it flexed when you went down it. And we kind of jokingly referred to it as the ladder of death because it would have been awful to have taken a fall. Nonetheless, we went down the first couple times with hand lanterns and flashlights. We had some lighting down there, and we just basically investigated what was there. And what we discovered were 2 fairly good-sized, we call them caves, but they're actually constructed of brick.
Yeah, so it would have been maybe 11, 12 years ago, so I'd have been probably, early 40s. And it was just, this is so cool. This is so amazing. And I've always loved history, and to be able to see what the history was and to be able to kind of deconstruct how they did things. And I was just like a kid in a candy store going down there for the first time and exploring. And every time I go down there, you just get a sense that, man, I've really been somewhere. And it's something that, thousands and thousands of people every day drive right by that building, and they have no idea of the history and the significance.
Despite these illuminating personal experiences with the caves, the public is still left in the dark on just how much history surrounds them. That makes the continuous effort to research these caves even more special.
A friend of mine who I had done undergraduate with came back to the university basically right around then. She came back shortly after I came back to the university to work. And we were having coffee and we were trying to figure out good applications, fun applications for some of the cool technology that I had access to. If I remember correctly, we actually did the first scans in 2016. So the technology was a little bit older, and the very first time we went down with the scanner, we went down with some students, we went down with some press to show off what we were doing, and we collected 6 scans, and I believe we came out with about 75 million data points. That seems like a lot, but that scanner was really slow, so all the stuff we've done subsequently has vastly more points. And that gave us a pretty good view
they wouldn't have lasted 170 years if they weren't well constructed. So there's a lot to be learned about the skilled trade of construction and the materials they used.
From the sort of historian standpoint, I myself have a background in archaeology as well. Preservation is huge. And again, saving this for posterity should anything terrible happen. But then also, there are significant barriers to entry to this space. The tours cost money. If you're of a certain age, it's not accessible. Fortunately, the ladder of death over the years has been upgraded to slightly less deadly ladders of death, but it's still not something that some people just not going to be able to go. And being able to show and present those three-dimensional environments is where I'm, I guess, most interested. We've had a lot of opportunities where we've done talks and we've shown pictures and videos and engaged the public on the subject so they get a sense of what's going on down there without ever having the opportunity to be in there themselves.
As history pushes forward, we learn more about what came before us, below us, and what we can learn from our past.
Well, I think, it's amazing how things have changed, but it's also amazing how they have. It's really interesting to see that, there was a lot of strife and a lot of issues back in the day, and somehow we got through those. And, it gives me a little bit of hope for the future that, as screwed up as things are today, it's really not that much different than it's been in the past. And, I also like to say that if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. I think it's really important that people learn about the history, and there's so much about it. And I was very blessed that my grandpa was an amazing storyteller, and so was my grandma. And I would sit and listen, and I remembered. And, once they're gone, they're gone. And their stories die with them. And so I'm very fortunate that I was able to remember those stories to continue to pass them down. And when you get a connection with the brewer or the distiller or the winery, and the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, you get that connection, and that's where the magic happens.